I used a whole chicken as bait. What I caught wasn't a fish, it was what the fish fear. Before I tell you what happened that day on the lake, smash that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to share will make you think twice before you ever fish again. 2 people disappeared. Their boats were found drifting, empty, and I was the only one who saw it and lived to tell the story. I've been fishing these waters for 23 years. Lake Vermillion sits like a dark mirror between the mountains, so deep that locals say it has no bottom. I know every cove, every drop-off, every submerged log where bass hide. Or at least I thought I did. It started 3 weeks ago when old Henrik came into my bait shop, his hands shaking as he placed a crumpled $50 bill on the counter. Henrik had fished this lake longer than I'd been alive. 70 years, maybe more. His face was the color of ash. "You still selling those whole chickens for catfish?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sure am," I said, pulling a frozen chicken from the freezer. "Planning to go after the big boys?" Henrik's eyes met mine, and I saw something I'd never seen in the old man before. Fear, pure, undiluted fear. "Don't," he said simply. "Don't ever use the big bait, not anymore." I laughed it off. "Henrik, you feeling all right? You've been using whole chickens for decades." He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "The lake has changed. Something's down there now, something that makes the catfish hide. The base won't even go deep anymore. You see them? They're all in the shallows now, every single one." I had noticed that, actually. The shallow waters were crowded with fish that should have been in deeper territory, but I'd assumed it was just a seasonal thing. Water temperature, maybe. "What are you saying, Henrik?" He leaned close, and I could smell the coffee and old tobacco on his breath. "I'm saying that if you use the big bait, something will come, and it won't be a catfish." Then he left without taking the chicken, leaving the $50 on my counter and a cold feeling in my gut. But I didn't listen. I should have, but I didn't. 2 days after Henrik's warning, Marcus Chen went missing. Marcus was a tournament angler, one of those young guys with expensive boats and even more expensive gear. He'd been bragging on social media about landing a monster catch at Lake Vermillion. His last post showed him holding a whole frozen turkey captioned, "Going biblical on these catfish. Pray for my rod." They found his boat 3 days later, drifting near the north shore, engine still running, expensive rod snapped clean in half. His tackle box was open, and all his line had been stripped from every reel, hundreds of yards of heavy braided line, just gone. But no Marcus. The strange part? His life jacket was still in the boat, neatly folded, and scratched into the fiberglass hull, as if done with frantic fingernails, were 4 words. "It saw me first." The sheriff ruled it an accidental drowning, assuming Marcus had fallen overboard. But I knew better. Marcus was too careful, too experienced. And those rods weren't just broken, they'd been snapped under immense pressure, the kind you only see when you hook into something truly massive. I stood in my shop that evening, staring at the freezer full of whole chickens and turkeys. Henrik's words echoed in my mind. My rational brain said to stay away. But there was another part of me, the part that had been fishing since I was 6 years old, that whispered a different message. You need to know what's down there. That night, I made my decision. I would go out at dawn, use the biggest bait I had, and see for myself what was lurking in the depths of Lake Vermillion. I told myself I was being scientific, investigative. I was lying to myself. I was obsessed. I spent the next day preparing for something I couldn't name. My usual fishing setup wouldn't cut it. I knew that instinctively. If something out there could snap Marcus's tournament-grade rods like toothpicks, I needed to go bigger. I drove 2 hours to a commercial fishing supply store and bought equipment meant for ocean fishing, a heavy saltwater rod rated for tuna and marlin, a massive reel loaded with 200-pound braided line, and hooks the size of my hand. The clerk looked at me like I was crazy. Freshwater. Lake fishing, you said? He raised an eyebrow. Big catfish, I replied, really big. He didn't ask questions, just took my money. For bait, I bought the largest whole chicken I could find, a 6-pound roaster. As I was checking out, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, my ex-wife. Heard about Marcus, please don't do anything stupid. How did she know? Sarah always had a sixth sense about my reckless decisions. It's why she left me 3 years ago, said I was married to the lake more than to her. She wasn't wrong. I texted back, just checking something, I'll be careful. Her reply was immediate. That's what you always say. Back home, I rigged the chicken onto a heavy steel leader, using 3 massive hooks to secure it. The setup looked absurd, like something you'd use to catch a shark. In my small fishing boat, it looked even more ridiculous. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was preparing for war, not fishing. That night, I barely slept. I kept dreaming of dark water, and something vast moving beneath the surface, something that watched with ancient, patient eyes. In the dream, I could hear Henrik's voice. The fish know. They all know. At 4:47 a.m., I gave up on sleep and started loading my truck. By the time the sun touched the eastern mountains, I was on the water. The lake was glass smooth, reflecting the pink and orange sky like a painting. Fog clung to the water's surface in wispy layers. It was the kind of morning that would normally make my soul sing, peaceful, perfect, pristine. But today it felt wrong. The silence was too complete. No jumping fish, no birds diving for breakfast, no ripples except the ones my boat made cutting through the fog. I navigated to the deepest part of the lake, a spot where the bottom dropped to over 300 feet. The fish finder showed nothing but empty water and the distant flat line of the lake bed. The shallows, meanwhile, were packed with fish signatures, just like Henrik had said. Something had driven every fish in this lake into the shallows. My hands were steady as I prepared the rig. The whole chicken hung from the massive hooks, pale and grotesque in the early morning light. I attached a heavy weight, 8 ounces of lead, to get it down fast. This is insane, I muttered to myself, but I didn't stop. I cast the rig out, watching the weighted chicken arc through the air before splashing down 40 feet from the boat. The line peeled out as it sank. 50 feet, 100, 150, 200. At 280 feet it hit bottom. I set the rod in the holder, adjusted the drag and waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. The sun was fully up now, burning away the fog. I took a drink from my thermos, almost ready to admit this was a waste of time. That's when the fish finder lit up. Something was rising from the bottom, fast. The signature on the fish finder wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. It was massive. The display showed it as a solid red mass, so large that it couldn't be a single fish. It had to be a school, maybe 100 catfish drawn to the scent of the chicken. Except it moved like a single organism, rising straight up from the abyss with terrifying speed. 200 feet, 150, 100. My heart hammered in my chest. I stood up, gripping the rod even though it was still in the holder. The line was tight, thrumming with the vibration of deep water current. 50 feet from the surface, the signature stopped. The lake became perfectly still. Even the gentle rocking of my boat seemed to cease. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then the rod bent. It didn't bend gradually like a normal strike. It bent all at once, violently, nearly pulling free from the holder. I grabbed it with both hands, and the shock of the weight traveled up my arms and into my shoulders. This wasn't a fish taking bait. This was something claiming it. The line screamed off the reel, 50 yards, 100, 200. I tightened the drag, and the rod bent into a parabola that shouldn't have been possible. The graphite should have shattered. Whatever I'd hooked was powerful beyond comprehension, and it was diving. The fish finder showed it dropping back into the abyss, taking my line with it. 300 feet, 400. The depth here shouldn't have gone past 320. Impossible, I gasped, wrestling with the rod. My boat was being pulled backward across the lake, cutting a wake through the still water. I'd heard Stories of marlin and tuna towing boats for miles, but this was a lake. This shouldn't be possible. 500 feet, 600. The line was almost gone. I had to do something or lose everything. The rig, the rod, my pride, and maybe my mind. I tightened the drag to maximum, knowing it would either stop the creature or break the line. The rod bent further. The reel screamed. My arms burned. And then, impossibly, whatever was down there stopped pulling. For 10 minutes, we existed in perfect balance, me in my small aluminum boat on the surface, and something massive in the depths below. Neither of us pulled. Neither of us gave line. We were locked in a stalemate that defied everything I knew about fishing. My arms trembled from the constant pressure. Sweat ran down my face despite the cool morning air. The rod remained bent at that impossible angle, thrumming with tension. Then I felt it. A series of vibrations traveling up the line. Not the head shaking of a catfish, not the runs of a bass. These were slow, rhythmic pulses, almost like it was testing me, studying me. "What are you?" I whispered to the water. The pulses stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the tension of the line and the sound of my own breathing. Then the creature began to rise. Slowly this time, deliberately. I reeled frantically, trying to keep tension on the line, but it was rising faster than I could crank. The line went slack for a terrifying moment, and I thought I'd lost it. Then the line snapped tight again, and I realized with horror what was happening. It wasn't running, it wasn't fighting, it was coming to the surface. The fish finder showed the massive signature rising steadily. 500 feet, 400, 300. No, 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 I heard myself saying. Part of me wanted to cut the line, start the engine, and get the hell away from here. But I was paralyzed, locked in place by a mixture of fear and fascination. 200 feet. The water around my boat began to change. Small fish, bass, perch, bluegill, broke the surface in a panic, jumping clear out of the water as if fleeing from something terrible. They scattered in all directions, creating expanding rings of ripples that intersected and merged. 100 feet. I could see it now on the fish finder, a mass so large it seemed to fill the entire screen. The device's depth reading began glitching, the numbers flickering and jumping erratically. 50 feet. The water beneath my boat turned dark, as if a massive shadow had risen from below. The temperature dropped. I could see my breath suddenly, white puffs in the air that should have been warm with the risen sun. 25 feet. God help me, I breathed. And then I saw it. What broke the surface wasn't a catfish, wasn't any kind of fish I'd ever seen or even imagined. The head that emerged was as wide as my boat, covered in dark, mottled scales that seemed to shift colors like oil on water, brown, green, black, and something else, something that hurt to look at. Eyes the size of dinner plates regarded me with an intelligence that made my blood freeze. They weren't the flat, emotionless eyes of a fish. These eyes had depth, consciousness, intent. A mouth opened, revealing rows of teeth that curved backward, designed not just to kill but to hold, to drag down, to never let go. The jaw was wrong. It unhinged like a snake's, but this was no snake. It was something older, something that should have been extinct for millions of years if it had ever existed at all. Water cascaded off its massive head as it rose higher, and I could see gills the size of dinner plates opening and closing, except they weren't just gills. There were openings along the neck too, spiracles maybe, like a prehistoric shark. It looked at me, not at the boat, not at the water, at me. And I understood in that moment what Henrik had meant. This thing didn't just hunt fish. It didn't just eat them. It terrified them. It was the apex predator of this ecosystem, something so far beyond the normal food chain that every other creature in the lake lived in constant fear of its presence. That's why the fish crowded the shallows. They knew. They could sense it down there in the deep places, and they stayed as far away as possible. The creature's mouth closed, and it sank back down slightly, until only those massive eyes remained above the surface, watching me. Steam rose from the water around it, or maybe it was just the cold radiating from its body meeting the warm morning air. My hands were locked on the rod. I couldn't move, couldn't think, could barely breathe. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then it spoke, not with words, not with sound, but I heard it anyway, felt it in my bones, in the base of my skull. "You shouldn't have called me." And it sank. The creature descended with incredible speed, taking my line with it. But this time felt different. There was no violence in it, no fighting. It was simply leaving. I watched the fish finder as the massive signature dropped into the abyss. 300 feet, 500, 800. The numbers kept going, far beyond the known depth of the lake. Either my equipment was malfunctioning, or Lake Vermillion was much, much deeper than anyone knew. At 200 feet, the signature vanished from the screen entirely. The line went slack. I reeled in, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the rod. When the leader finally emerged, all three of the massive hooks were bent open, straightened like paper clips. The whole chicken was gone, not eaten, not torn apart, just gone. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the seat, the rod clattering to the floor of the boat. For several minutes, I just sat there, staring at the calm water, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen was real. The sun was bright now, the lake surface sparkling and beautiful. Ducks had returned, landing with small splashes. A fish jumped. Nearby, life returning to normal, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Everything had happened. Everything had changed. I started the engine with trembling hands and headed back to shore, going slowly, my mind replaying those eyes, that mouth, that voice that wasn't a voice. "You shouldn't have called me," as if I'd summoned it somehow, as if using the big bait was like ringing a dinner bell for something ancient and terrible. When I reached the dock, Henrik was there, sitting on a bench, looking like he'd been waiting for me. He stood as I tied up the boat, his old eyes scanning my face. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. "You saw it," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, and you survived." He seemed almost surprised by that. "Barely? Henrik, what the hell is that thing? How long has it been down there?" The old man was quiet for a long moment, watching a family of geese paddle past. Longer than the town, longer than the name Vermillion. The old tribes, who lived here before anyone else, they had a name for it. Roughly translates to the thing that waits below. They never fished the deep water, never. "Why didn't you tell me this before? Why didn't you warn people?" Henrik's laugh was bitter. "You think people would believe me? You think they'd listen? I tried 40 years ago, told the sheriff, told the newspaper. They called me a drunk, a crazy old man telling fish stories." He looked at me hard. "Would you have believed me if I'd told you? Or would you have gone out anyway, just to prove me wrong?" He was right. I would have gone. Maybe I'd needed to see it with my own eyes. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Nothing. You do nothing. You don't talk about it. You don't go back out there with the big bait. You warn anyone who asks, knowing they probably won't listen, just like you didn't." He started to walk away, then stopped. "One more thing. It let you go." "What?" "It let you live. That means something. Most people who see it don't come back. Marcus didn't. 3 others over the years didn't. But it let you go. Maybe it wanted you to know. Maybe it wanted a witness." His eyes were sad. "Or maybe it's getting hungry enough that soon warnings won't matter anymore." He shuffled away, leaving me alone on the dock with too many questions and not enough answers. I closed my shop early that day, went home, tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those eyes staring back. I should have listened to Henrik, should have kept quiet, gone back to my life, tried to forget what I'd seen, but I didn't. 3 days later, Sarah called me. "Please tell me you're not posting on Facebook about lake monsters." I'd created a post in the Lake Vermillion fishing group, not naming the creature or being too specific, just warning people about using large bait in deep water. I'd kept it vague, scientific sounding, talked about unusual predatory activity, recommended catch and release only, suggested staying in shallower areas. I'm trying to help people, Sarah. You're trying to convince yourself you're not crazy, she said, but her voice was gentle. How bad was it? What you saw? I told her. Everything. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I'd always loved about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. I believe you, she finally said. That's the thing. I actually believe you. And that terrifies me more than if I thought you were making it up. Stay away from the lake, I told her. Promise me. I promise. But Derek, she paused, you need to really warn people, not just a vague Facebook post. If this thing is as dangerous as you say, people need to know. She was right, of course. But how do you explain something that shouldn't exist? How do you make people understand? I decided to try. Over the next week, I talked to everyone who would listen. I went to the sheriff's department, where Deputy Morrison looked at me with the same skeptical expression. They'd probably given Henrik decades ago. I contacted the state wildlife department, who thanked me for my concern and assured me they'd look into it. I even called a local news station, but they wanted video evidence, photographs, something concrete. All I had was bent hooks and a story that sounded insane. The fishing forums were even worse. Most people laughed it off, called it a hoax, said I was trying to scare away competition. A few believed me, but they were the conspiracy theory types, the ones who immediately started talking about government experiments and mutant fish. Only one response gave me chills. A user named Deep Watcher sent me a private message. How big was the bait you used? 6-pound whole chicken, I replied. Then you got off easy. The bigger the bait, the more of its attention you get. Don't go bigger. Whatever you do, don't go bigger. I tried to respond, ask questions, but the account had been deleted, gone like it had never existed. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about Deepwatcher's warning. The bigger the bait, the more attention you get, as if the creature's response was proportional to the offering, as if it was intelligent, strategic. I thought about Marcus and his frozen turkey. Had he gotten more than attention? Had he gotten something worse? At 2 a.m. my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Heavy breathing on the other end. Then a familiar voice, thin and strained. Derek? Henrik? It's moving? The old man's voice was terrified. I can feel it moving. It's not staying in the deep anymore. It's coming up, closer to shore. The fish are going crazy. They're trying to beach themselves to get away from it. Henrik, where are you? At the North Shore. I couldn't sleep. Came down to check. His voice broke. God, Derek, what have we done? What did we wake up? Henrik! The line went dead. I tried calling back. No answer. I threw on clothes and ran to my truck, but even as I drove toward the north shore, I knew I was too late. I was right. I found Henrik's truck parked at the North Shore access point, driver's door open, keys still in the ignition. His phone was on the ground, screen cracked. The beach was littered with dead fish, bass, perch, bluegill, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They'd thrown themselves onto the sand and rocks, suffocating in the air rather than staying in the water. The ones still in the shallows were swimming in frantic circles, bumping into each other in their panic. Henrik's fishing rod lay snapped in half at the water's edge, but no Henrik. I called his name, knowing it was useless, knowing what I'd find, or wouldn't find, more accurately. The sheriff's department arrived 40 minutes later. They searched until dawn, dragging the shallows, sending divers down in the deeper areas near shore. They found nothing. Henrik had vanished as completely as Marcus had, leaving behind only questions and the terrible certainty in my gut that I knew what had happened to him. Deputy Morrison pulled me aside as the sun came up. This is the second disappearance in a month, both experienced fishermen, both on Lake Vermillion. His eyes were hard. "You've been warning people about something in the water. You know something. I tried to tell you last week. You didn't listen. Tell me again. All of it." So I did, standing there on that beach covered in dead fish, with Henrik's broken rod at our feet. I told him everything, about the creature, about the warnings, about how it seemed to respond to large bait. To his credit, Morrison didn't laugh. He looked out at the water, at the fish still trying to escape, and said quietly, "We need to close the lake. They won't let you. Too much tourism money. The town depends on it." He knew I was right. Lake Vermillion brought in millions annually. Summer homes, fishing tournaments, boat rentals, the hotel and restaurant business. Closing it would require proof, and we had none except disappearances that could be explained away as accidents. "Then what do we do?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. Over the next 3 days, I tried everything I could think of. I created detailed posts with warnings. I spoke to the town council, who politely asked me to stop spreading panic. I even stood at the boat launch with a handmade sign, "Danger, do not use large bait in deep water." People thought I was crazy, or worse, they thought it was funny. On the 3rd day, I saw 2 college kids loading a boat. With supplies, in their cooler, I glimpsed a frozen turkey. "Don't," I said, walking up to them. "Please, don't use that." They looked at each other and smirked. "Bro, we read your posts. We know you're trying to scare people away from the good spots. Not gonna work." "I'm not trying to listen to me. 2 people have died. 2 people I knew. Something is down there, something dangerous, and it responds to large bait." The taller kid laughed. "A monster fish? Come on, man. This is getting sad." They launched their boat and headed out into the lake. I stood on the dock, helpless, watching them motor toward the deep water. I thought about calling the sheriff, thought about taking my own boat out, trying to stop them somehow. But I did nothing. I was frozen by the certainty of what was going to happen and the hopelessness of trying to prevent it. They never came back. It's been 6 months since that day. The lake is closed now, officially due to environmental concerns and ongoing investigation. The 2 college kids' boat was found drifting just like Marcus's. No bodies, no survivors. Just another mystery that the official reports will never adequately explain. I don't fish anymore. Can't bring myself to even look at my rods. I sold the bait shop, moved inland, as far from any large body of water as I could get. But I still dream about it. Every night, I dream of those eyes, that intelligence, that voice that wasn't a voice. You shouldn't have called me. I've spent months researching, trying to understand. I found references in old texts, in indigenous legends from around the world, stories of things that live in the deep places, older than civilization, patient as stone, things that wait in the darkness, that rise only when summoned, when the offering is substantial enough to warrant their attention. The bait was big. What I caught was bigger, and the fish know it. All of them know it. Every creature in that ecosystem has learned to fear the deep, to stay in the shallows where the light reaches, where there's at least a chance of escape. But here's what keeps me awake at night. Lake Vermillion isn't unique. There are thousands of deep lakes around the world, oceans with trenches that go down miles, places we've never fully explored, where the pressure is too great for humans, where light has never reached. What if they're all down there, waiting? What if they've always been there, and we've just been lucky that most people don't use the big bait? Henrik knew. Maybe others knew too, scattered across the world. Fishermen with stories they couldn't tell, warnings that nobody believed. I tried to be a witness. I tried to warn people. But who listens to crazy stories about lake monsters? Last week, I saw a documentary about recreational fishing growing in popularity. More people on the water than ever before. Bigger competitions, larger prizes, more elaborate bait. And I thought, we're ringing the dinner bell. All of us, all around the world. We're calling them up from the deep. The bait keeps getting bigger, and what we catch will keep getting bigger too. The fish know this. They've always known. Maybe it's time we learned. The lake remains closed, but that won't last forever. Economic pressure is mounting. People want their recreation back, their tourism dollars, their fishing tournaments. They'll reopen it eventually with new safety regulations that won't address the real danger. And when they do, something will be waiting. In the deep, patient, hungry, ancient, ready to answer the call of the next person who uses the big bait.